Good evening and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Kirstin. I'm the event manager for Northshire's Saratoga Springs, New York location, here as I so often am with my good friend and colleague, Davith Wood, event manager for Northshire's Manchester Center, Vermont location. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you for your incredible support of the Northshire bookstores through the last couple of years. It hasn't been easy times, and we're still standing due to your wonderful continued loyalty and support. So thank you very, very much for that. Please use the chat box throughout the evening for any comments you might have. Davith and I will be hanging out in that chat, so we're happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have there. And Davith, in just a moment, will be posting a link in the chat to our blog post that lists all of tonight's books, and you can follow along there and also conveniently order them right there on our website at northshire.com. If you're joining us on the YouTube recording of this event after the fact, you can find that blog post by going to northshire.com and then clicking on the Notes from the Shire blog and then looking for the July Bookseller book chat. So thank you all so much for being here tonight, and I'm going to hand things over to Davith to introduce our first bookseller.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Alden Graves, master bookseller at Northshire's Manchester location. Alden, tell us about the books you've been reading.
Okay, Jeff. I want to start with my two favorite books of 2022. And they're both kind of unusual choices for me because between them, they encompass all four of the elements that I try very hard to avoid in books. The first one, I'm not crazy about books about animals. And for that fact alone, I probably should have realized that Geraldine Brooks' book called Horse was probably going to be about an animal. And it is. The book is about a young man's attempt to trace the origin of a painting that he finds on a city sidewalk in Washington, D.C. Not only the origins and the artists of the painting, but the horse that's in the painting. The book, it takes place over the span of well over a century. It's set in three different time periods, right before and during the Civil War, and in the 1950s and just a few years ago. And in the book, Brooks displays her incredible talent for research and detail. It is about a horse that really existed, and the horse's name was Livingston, and it was recognized as the greatest racehorse in American history. But the book is really very much concerned also with racism, which obviously was a factor in America during the Civil War, and is pretty much a potent factor today. There is an incident in the book that's absolutely jaw-dropping. It is so shocking and so familiar to people who live in present-day America. It's a wonderful book. I think it's my favorite Geraldine Brooks book, and I've liked all of her books. This one has taken its place as my favorite. The other book, the second book that I've liked very much in 2022 is The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Also an unusual choice for me because science fiction, time travel, I think time travel is especially troublesome for me because I'm never quite sure what time period I'm in when I'm reading a book that takes place in the past or in the future. And there's also an element of children in Sea of Tranquility, and I'm not crazy about an influx of children in the books that I'm reading, but all three of these elements just they mold together in this book, and it is just a wonderful, wonderful book. It's based on a fairly simple premise. A young man travels back in time to try and discover the origins of a momentary flash in time that nobody seemed to be able to explain. It's just a bright flash of light that occurs to certain people at certain times, and he wants to find out the origins of it. And he is cautioned by the Time Institute, which is the place he has to get permission from to go back in time, that they're going to allow him to do it, even though they have a lot of hesitations. But they strictly admonish him that he cannot change anything that happens that might alter history in any way, under the penalties of being banished to the far colonies. And I want to read what I wrote about it. Reading this fascinating novel is a little like finding your way through a complex maze, and the light shining at the end will catch all but the most perceptive completely off guard. It certainly did me. Very few authors could weave threads of a dystopian future, a devastating pandemic, time travel, and habitation in dome-covered worlds into a tapestry as dazzling as the one in this novel. I highly recommend this. I've read The Glass Hotel by her, which I liked, but nowhere near as much as I like Sea of Tranquility. The third book I want to mention is a true crime book, and it is called Trailed by Catherine Miles. This book is the result of a personal crusade by the author to try and solve the brutal murders of two young women in the Shenandoah National Park in 1996. She found herself up against a wall of a stonewalling from both the FBI that investigated the case, and more particularly from the National Park Service, which was anxious that the adverse attention that inevitably follows a double homicide does not negatively impact on attendance in the parks. It was reminiscent of the official response to the shark in Jaws, although this was true. This riveting true crime story, it's a cautionary tale too about how dangerous, and that's the word, dangerous hiking is, especially for women. It's very, very dangerous, and great caution should be taken when you embark on it. The next book I would like to talk about is called Breathless, and the author is Amy McCullough. I really like this book. It's sort of a guilty pleasure type of book. It is about a world-class mountain climber. And as far as the details of mountain climbing are concerned, this reminded me of all the details that you learned about kayaking in Peter Heller's book, The River. This book is about a man who is about to ascend one of the highest peaks in the world, which will mean that he has ascended all 8 of the highest peaks in the world in a year's time. And that is a historic record for mountain climbers. And to celebrate it, a bunch of world-class mountain climbers have gathered to make the ascent with him. And one of them says at the beginning of the climb that he's going to reveal the real cause of a death on one of the previous climbs. And very shortly, this man who has made this statement also turns up dead. So you really have a situation where people begin to wonder if the dangers of climbing this mountain is going to be quite as dangerous as the people that are, at least one of the persons that are on the climb. It's sort of a combination Agatha Christie and Alistair MacLean book, and it's a lot of fun. It really is. And the last book I want to read tell you about has recently been released in paperback. And I don't read a lot of books about war, at least not a lot of true books, nonfiction books about war. This by far is one of the most interesting I've ever read. And I want to read to you again what I wrote about it. It examines how much of an individual's conception of what comprises moral behavior must be sacrificed during a war. Gladwell approaches this difficult question by contrasting two very different schools of thought pertaining the air bombings over Germany and Japan during the Second World War. So-called precision bombing, sporadically aided by the newly developed Nordson bomb sight, which was occasionally not very accurate, helped to minimize civilian casualties. The carpet bombing that indiscriminately destroyed large swaths of enemy territory also took a terrible toll on the populace. But the argument for using that was that it would shorten the war. And Malcolm Gladwell doesn't really take a position on which is the more moral stance, although as a reader, I did, but he really doesn't. And I think what he may be saying is that he's not either preaching or accusing, largely leaving it up to the reader to decide if the notions of good and bad can even be applied at all in wartime. This is a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. It reads like fiction. It is so incredible, but it is all true. And the last book I want to mention, I don't have a copy of it. It is coming out in September. And it is the fourth of the Lucy Barton books by Elizabeth Strout. And this one is called Lucy by the Sea. And it is the best of the Lucy Barton books. It encompasses all her characters. Olive Kittredge is in the book, and Bob Burgess from the Burgess Boys is in the book. But it's setting Lucy and her husband in the middle of the pandemic. And it's a wonderful book. And I really, really liked it.
Thank you so much, Alden. That was a wonderful review. One of the real perks of North Shire is getting to talk to Alden about some books. All right, well, thank you, Alden. Next up, we have Kirstin Schwartz from our Saratoga Springs, New York store. Kirstin, tell us about some of your books.
All right. Happy to be here, guys. So I've got a good couple of books to talk about. The first book I'm gonna bring up, I don't have a physical copy of because it's gonna be out in a little over 2 weeks from now on July 19th. And that first book is called The Work Wife by Allison B. Hart. It's gonna be a debut novel. And it's gonna be set in Hollywood. And we're gonna be following 3 different women. So there's the work wife, who is Zan, like Dan, I guess her name was Suzanne, but now she wants to go by Zan. And she is the personal assistant to one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, who directed like a big franchise, think like Star Wars big per franchise. So she's the work wife of this guy. The other person is the actual wife, which is Holly, and she's married to this director, Ted Stabler. And she's just kind of like gone from small town girl to big time wife. She's kind of a little ignorant, but still very interesting to follow. And then the third character is the former wife of this person, and her name is Phoebe. And she's trying to be a director herself in the midst of all of this. But something happened previously when she was married to the director, Ted, where it kind of like ruined her career. She was blacklisted from Hollywood, and now she's back. And all these characters are gonna clash together and connect on this one day that a huge party is supposed to be happening at the director's estate in Hollywood. And a lot of ugly truths are gonna come out. It's very centered around the Me Too movement. It's set in now though, in like 2022. So it's kind of a reminder of like, this is still a huge movement going on that people still need to be focused on and still be concerned about. And be aware that there's still a lot of silent voices, not just victims, but voices waiting to be heard and recognized. So very entertaining, a little bit of thrills, plot twists and shocks, and just a really good debut. So that will be out in a little over 2 weeks from now. The next book I'm going to talk about is a recent release. It's a mystery horror called Hide by Kirstin White. Kirstin White is mostly known for a lot of her young adult fiction that she's written previously. This is her first deep dive into adult horror, and it was fantastic. This is the advanced reader copy, but like the printed form that's available for sale is also a very short read. So you just kind of fly right through it. I personally couldn't put it down. And it's set at this like old abandoned amusement park where this reality show has 14 contestants competing for this giant, massive prize that'll change each of these contestants' lives. They each really need this money. And it's 1 week, 14 contestants. And all they have to do is hide. So they just have to hide somewhere in the amusement park and not get found. And the last person standing will win the prize. Only as more days pass, each of the contestants start to realize that this competition is not at all what it seems. Something is definitely seeking them, but what is it? And I enjoyed that it was very supernaturally kind of terrifying, but in that kind of way, when you feel like you're going on a old amusement park roller coaster and you're feeling excited and scared at the same time. That's how you'll feel when reading this book. Definitely surprised me. One of my favorites of the year for sure. The next book I'm going to talk about is another new release, and that one is called, in a big pile of books here, The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. So Julie Clark first wrote The Last Flight, and that came out during the pandemic. It was one of my like lifesaver mysteries during the peak of the pandemic in 2020. And I was really looking forward to seeing what else she was going to come out with. The only thing is I didn't expect to love this one a lot more than that first book of hers. This is fantastic. There's not a lot of mysteries where I can read each chapter with a smile on my face and feel like I'm having fun, because I love dark mysteries. But this one is kind of like a con woman set story. If you're a fan of like the TV show Imposters or the film Catch Me If You Can, you would really like this book. So the two main characters are Meg, a con artist with a tragic upbringing, and Kat, the reporter whose career was ruined 10 years prior during the beginning of Meg's con artist schemes. So their lives are very interwoven, and they find themselves at present day kind of like trying to out-con each other in this cat and mouse game. And Meg was a very interesting character to follow. You know, she's hiding a lot, and you're trying to figure out who she really is underneath all these characters and personalities that she hides behind to complete her schemes. And Kat was very interesting as well. So yeah, it was a very fun, interesting mystery. Very much loved it. The next book I'm going to talk about is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. She's most known for her first 2 hits that have been amazing reads for the past 2 summers, Beach Read and People We Meet on Vacation. And I am surprised to say that this is now my favorite out of her 3 books. So not only is it kind of like an ode to book lovers and booksellers, because there's a lot of book talk. The main characters, Nora and Charlie, both work in the publishing industry. Nora is a literary agent and Charlie's an editor. So there's a lot of stuff as a bookseller you can appreciate, but also just a lover of literature you can appreciate. But it's set in this like quaint little town in North Carolina. Nora and her little sister are going on an end of summer trip down there to kind of just like do all these things off their bucket list. Her little sister's about to have another baby, and Nora wants to kind of like get out of her comfort zone. She's very like to the T, work, 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 you know. She wants to get a little more lively with herself. But Charlie, who is an editor and one of her nemesises from work, happens to be also in that same town during the end of summer because he's from there. And their kind of like work enemies dynamic sort of falls apart, and they just ended up building this really great friendship and eventual spicy romance as they get very comfortable with each other. You know, I always forget that Emily Henry writes in a way that gets you really in your feelings. And this was a surprisingly emotional read. I think it's a great book for a lot of millennials or people my age who want to feel like they're not alone with the situation of, are you satisfied with your work life? Did you settle so that you can have a job? Or do you feel like your work also has purpose? And that struggle with a lot of millennials these days. So I felt like that was really relatable, but the romance was also just perfect. So great summer read, highly recommend before it starts getting chilly again. Another book I'm going to talk about, this is coming out, I think, next Tuesday. And this is The It Girl by Ruth Ware. I was so excited for this because I love Ruth Ware. She wrote One by One, The Woman in Cabin 10, Turn of the Key. Like, she's one of the biggest mystery authors right now, very modern day Agatha Christie type of writer. And I was very excited for her new book to be out. And I loved that this one was a little bit different from her other works. This one was kind of set in 2 different timelines and had a dark academia feel to it. You're following a main character, Hannah Jones, in the past and present. In the past, 10 years ago, it's her beginning tenure as a student at Oxford. And it's her, you know, getting out of her comfort zone, meeting friends. She gains this best friend through her roommate, April. But before their freshman year can end, April is tragically murdered. And thanks to Hannah's testimony, they believe they had caught the culprit and sent him to prison for life. 10 years later, Hannah is far, far away in Edinburgh, nowhere near Oxford, had dropped out immediately after the murder. Married, about to have a baby, just trying to live her life. That person who was sent away, turns out that he had just died. And there's a reporter now approaching her saying that he thinks that that person was actually innocent and that she sent the wrong man to jail. So her guilt, but also her love for her best friend that has still carried on for 10 years, drives her to go back down this very stressful rabbit hole that was this time in her life and try to figure out whether or not her best friend's murder was actually brought to justice. So really thrilling. I loved the campus vibe to it and the flashbacks and the Oxford setting as well. That was always good. But yeah, very refreshing read. Never disappointed with Ruth Ware, ever. Never, ever. The next book I'm going to talk about is another, you know, it is heartfelt and lighthearted, but it's also really sad, but it's also really amazing. One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. This is the same author who wrote In 5 Years. And if you were one of our very first attendees way back in our beginning book chats, I probably talked about this book and had let you know that In 5 Years is going to rip your heart into very small pieces. That's exactly what this one's going to do too. But this one's set in Italy, so like it balances each other out. So the main character for this book, Katie, her mother had just died suddenly. Her mother was only 60 years old. And just a few months prior, they found out she had terminal cancer, and it just took her really quick, like out of nowhere. And Katie and her mother were very, very close. So it kind of puts her in this life crisis of like, I don't know what to do with my life anymore. I don't have my mom. I don't have my best friend. So what do I even do? Like, who even am I? And they were supposed to go on this trip to this village in Italy that the mom had gone to when she was 30 years old. And they were supposed to go do this together. Of course, she passed away. So Katie decides to take a break from the US and from everything and go on the trip on her own. And what she finds there, on top of a beautiful view and grieving in the sunshine with pasta, is that there's a woman who is her mother, but at the age of 30, also living on this resort area in Italy. And it's very magical. Like, how does that happen? How is this possible? Is she a ghost? Is Katie hallucinating? You have no idea. I love that Rebecca Searle keeps just a touch of magic in there, and you really don't know where the story's going to go. But at the end of the day, this book is really a heartful lesson on grief and how to go on when you lose the most important person in your life. So made me cry, made me hug my own mother a lot tighter, but also beautiful backdrop of Italy. So great cleansing read. My very last book I'm going to talk about is an older book, and one that I've been holding off on reading for a while, just because it's very, very popular. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I have not read any Colleen Hoover before. This is my first go at it. I am not disappointed at all. It hurt me in a good way. I'm looking forward to more Colleen Hoover in the future. But yeah, I waited a long time to read this one, but it was very, very good. I want to put out a full disclosure that I don't think it's a romance. There was a lot of discussion as booksellers whether or not Colleen Hoover was a romance author or a fiction author or even a young adult author with some of her books. Her books are kind of all over the place in their genres. This is not a romance. This is a story about the different types of abusive relationships and how they can look and how they can hide behind a nice smile or a loving personality. And I think that she did a very good job on making you feel exactly like the main character felt during this book. So you follow Lily Bloom, which is an adorable name. She is a young woman. She's starting her life fresh in Boston. Her father, who was an abusive jerk, had just passed away. And she wants to start her own gardening business in Boston, where she meets Ryle, who is this very attractive, confident neurosurgeon. And he and her kind of do this dance of will they, won't they, until they eventually get together. And I think Colleen Hoover did a really great job of making you fall in love with the character of Ryle as much as Lily fell in love with him. And it was very important because when it gets to the point of things going south real fast, it breaks your heart as much as it breaks Lily's heart. So I thought this was a really great take on abusive relationships, really tragic, but also beautiful. I'm not disappointed. I look forward to more of Colleen Hoover's. All right, that's all I've got for today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirstin. It's always fun to hear you and you're so passionate about your books. Thanks so much. Next up, we've got Cathy Taylor from Northshire's Manchester store. Hi, Cathy. Welcome back. Thanks so much. And tell us about some of the books you've been reading.
Okay, hi everyone. My first book I want to talk about is Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler. It's on paperback now. So the question that seems to be posed by Lauren in her debut novel is, how do you write a book about the internet? The story begins pretty normally enough. A young woman is dating a young man. They live in New York City. She works in media. Their relationship has its typical ups and downs. During one of the down periods, the woman, suspecting infidelity, snoops through her boyfriend's phone and opens a can of worms she couldn't have predicted. Her boyfriend, who she thought she knew so well, has an alternate virtual life as a sort of internet troll, just an entirely separate persona, which he uses to spread what we would call like conspiracy theories and fake news. The revelation sends her spiraling so much that she leaves New York for Berlin, and there begins her own exploration of identity, which is a difficult task in a world where identity is so easily concealed and changed. I think the internet has become so much a part of our lives and ourselves that it's just a constant type of performance, and it's just always in our heads. So that's really what this novel is about, the internet and its lack of boundaries, and how its essential porousness makes it really hard for all of us to create inner reflective lives. So I think the questions raised by her journey are really interesting and really relevant to the world today, so I would check it out. That was Fake Accounts. The next one I want to talk about is by an author I really love, Lapthona by Tessa Mushbag. If you've read Tessa before, you know that her stories are very different, but they have similar themes. So human grotesqueness, absurdity, contradictions, failures. There's lots of darkness in her stories, but somehow that darkness is what makes possible any sort of redemption that we're capable of. So the story is set in the medieval village of Lapthona, and it has typical medieval features. An oppressed townsfolk, a tyrannical church, a shepherd and his hunchback son, an evil lord, and a mystical blind old woman who speaks to birds and has nursed almost the entire village population. The young hunchback Merrick endures his father Jude's abuse and dreams of his mute mother who vanished when he was a baby. Meanwhile, a plague has also destroyed what was once a happy and fertile land. Though he's generally a sweet and innocent boy, Merrick acts out in a violent outburst and radically changes his father and the lives of his father and himself. So I'll admit the novel is not for the faint of heart, just based on that description. It's pretty weird and yucky and violent at times, but the rewards of reading it, I think, are the language, the exquisite plot, and Mushbag's really unique voice and fixations. I think a lot of authors that I've picked up try to imitate her voice, but I think her voice is just so unique and singular that I would always recommend one of her books, and that's another good one. So the next one I'm going to talk about is a book of short stories called Daddy by Emma Klein. She wrote a book called The Girls a few years ago that got a lot of hype, but this is short stories, and I actually liked it better than The Girls. There aren't a whole lot of sympathetic characters. I guess I like books that don't have a whole lot of likable people, but the location of all these stories is Los Angeles. It really focuses on the writer scene there and Hollywood. So there's definitely seediness and glamour and a fair share of people either behaving badly or who have behaved badly, and not a lot of typical redemption to be found. There's people trying to make it in Hollywood and people who have made it, but who have found success more of a poison than a tonic. Also, you know, plenty of rich people, and I don't typically love to read novels about the lives of the rich and famous, but I think Emma Klein is probably one of the only people who I've read who has enough incision and intellect and skill to make me interested in the inner lives of the 1%, especially those who are unsavory and looking for pity for their bad behavior. The language she uses, I think, is perfectly suited to her topics. It's really clean and straightforward, with the perfect amount of information given and meted out at the right times. The way she structures her stories both reinforces the veneer and offers a glimpse behind the showy curtain of her characters' lives, and I think it's a really stunning collection of stories that is really worth checking out. I think it's a good summer book. I know my attention span's a little shorter in the summer, so short stories always, I don't know, grab me a bit more. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is Seven Steeples by Sarah Baum. And if you know me, you know I love a lyrical Irish novel with as little plot as possible. And this book fits the bill. It's a book about love, misanthropy, interiority, nature, and beauty. A young couple newly in love moves from Dublin to a small old house on a windy outcropping overlooking the ocean. They have 2 dogs, a van full of hand-me-down furniture, and a shared desire to retreat from the world of humans. Here's also a mountain that's ancient and wise that they keep trying to climb, never quite succeeding. So for 7 years, they live alone, uninterrupted by anything but their own conversations and rhythms. There's no dialogue, and like I said before, almost no plot. The author, I think, unsurprisingly, is a poet, so the language is really just exquisite. It's the descriptions of the natural world are just outstanding, and you know, just the way she talks about how this couple's lives just meld together and unify. If you aren't scared by the lack of drama or narrative tension, you should definitely pick this up because I think you'll be really moved by her writing. It's gorgeous. All right, so my last book I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites that I always have on my staff picks, but I don't think I've ever talked about it one of these before. It's called So Long, See You Tomorrow by William Maxwell. He was writer in the 20th century, longtime editor of the New Yorker, grew up in Illinois, which is where a lot of his books are set, and he often writes about the death of a mother, and that shows up here again. This book just has held up throughout the many years since I first read it. I think, I don't know, over a decade ago. It's perfectly written and plotted, which I don't know, I don't throw around perfect all the time, but it is. So the story begins with a man attempting to reconstruct a tragic event that happened when he was a boy. There was murder of a farmhand, and this murder he tries to piece together from his memory and from local newspaper clippings. He says actually in the book that any discussion of the past is a lie. So the best we can hope to do is reinterpret what has happened. You know, any discussion we try to make of what has happened to us will always be somehow invented. Oh, it's William Maxwell. Sorry, I saw that comment. Our narrator was a young boy in Lincoln, Illinois in 1921 when the tragedy happened. His mother had died and his father had remarried, which dislocated him from his childhood home to a newly built one in town. He forms a friendship with another troubled boy, Cletus, who lives on a farm. And this is when the murder of the tenant farmer happens. And it destroys their friendship. It sets our narrator down a path of regret and longing to make sense of his and Cletus's lives. I don't want to give too much away about the plot. I don't want to spoil it because it's a very short book and I think you should just read it. But what I want to say about it is that it's an exploration of what we irrevocably lose as we grow older, and how we must live with our failures and how other people fail us. He's just a master of sentence and story structure, and I think this book is a true wonder, so you should pick it up. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
I normally wouldn't say, please unmute yourself. Thank you so much, Cathy. I really appreciate that. Well, that's all of our presenters this evening, and I want to thank them all so much. This is always a really fun one of the events we throw. Rachel's joining us, I believe, to show us how to access the blog if you want to ever find this list of books again, besides just keeping the URL that I posted here. Here's another link to it I'll put up.
Actually, I was going to do a couple of very quick book recommendations of my own since we wrapped up so early, and I love to grab the microphone to do that when I can. I don't have these books with me. If anyone wants me to share a screen, I can do that to show pictures of them, or I can just quickly talk about them and put links to them in the chat. So first up, I want to give a very quick plug to Human Blues, which is by Elisa Albert. And that is a book that we are doing. I'm being asked to share screen, so I'm going to do that so you can see a picture of it. I've been a power user of the library lately and loaning out a lot of the galleys that I get. So that is why I don't have these books here at home. But let's see, I'm going to share screen. There we are. Okay, and let me make that bigger. This is Human Blues by Elisa Albert. We are hosting her in the Saratoga store a little bit later this month. It is a super weird experimental literary fiction novel that I absolutely adored. It was a true hoot and a joy to read. It reminded me a little bit of Jenny Awful, if anyone reads her. It's told in snippets. It's about an indie folk musician who is struggling to get pregnant and obsessed with the way that the fertility industry is really kind of messed up. It's about a lot more than that. It's a complicated, weird, ambitious read, and I loved every second of it. So that is Human Blues, and if you are local to the Saratoga store, come join us when Elisa Albert's in the store in a couple of weeks. And then heading over to my blog on our staff picks page, just quickly, I'm going to go through a couple of things I've read recently. These are all out now. Counterfeit by Kirstin Chen. This is a book about two college roommates who set up their own weird business returning counterfeit handbags to department stores and selling the real ones online. It is a lot of fun. It's a real, really subversive read. It's very, very perfect sort of beach read for the summer. So that is Counterfeit, a novel by Kirstin Chen. Flying Solo by Linda Holmes is if anyone read Linda Holmes' first novel, Evie Drake Starts Over, which was sort of a sweet, funny book with a lot of actually very complicated things to say about modern love. Flying Solo is very much in the same vein. So I strongly recommend that. It is a young woman returns home to her hometown, which is a tiny town in Maine, to settle her aunt's estate, and finds a duck decoy that gets stolen from her, that she doesn't know if it's valuable, that she has to come up with a whole heist to steal back. At the same time that she's sort of figuring out what it is to be a woman who doesn't actually want to get married and have kids. So it's a really lovely book. That's Flying Solo by Linda Holmes. And last of all, but certainly not least, When Women Were Dragons, which lives in the area sort of between literary fiction and fantasy that I particularly enjoy. It's a really lyrical, beautifully written novel set in an alternate version of America just after the mass dragoning of 1955, which is a day in which almost 700,000 American women spontaneously became dragons. It's partially about female rage. It's also partially about what happens when, as a society, we force people to forget, when we decide that certain things are unspeakable, and how that trauma can be heightened. It is an absolutely beautiful and lovely piece of writing, and that is When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. So that's my little mini list, a little bonus. I'm going to stop my share screen now. And I think that is about all we have time for. We will add those books that I just added in were not on the blog post that you already saw, but we will add them back in. So we'll add those back in tomorrow, so you'll be able to see them. But we had some time, so I thought I'd give a few extra books.
Well, thanks so much, Rachel. This has been a real pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. And you can find all those books online. Thanks so much, and see you at another event, virtual event sometime soon.